right, everybody. Thank you for being here. Welcome to Wednesday morning for most of us, maybe Wednesday afternoon for some folks. I'm Michael Munson, and if you are here to be part of the state-sanctioned hate, the impact of the culture wars on trans lives, you are in the correct place. So welcome, and let's get started today. We've got a lot of content that we're going to cover in the next 90 minutes. So if you would be willing and open to taking a moment with me and acknowledging the land that you're sitting on, land that you're standing on, the land that you are on right now. I know that we are all on different places in our world, and a lot of our world has been really harmed and damaged. And if we could just take a moment to acknowledge the pain and the hurt of what has happened in our world and send some positive, good energy to the healing of our earth and the healing of the people that are in it. Thank you. So our agenda today is pretty straightforward. We're going to talk a little bit about some framing things of like, who are we talking about? What are we talking about? When, where, just kind of framing those issues. We're going to then look at 12 different categories of state-sanctioned hate. So some examples from different areas of what's happening right now. We'll look at the impact on trans communities, trans people, and the communities. And then we'll look at some resilience and some positive things that are happening. And we'll close out with some resources. And hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A or other input from you all. So if you've been on a Forge webinar or training before, you have seen this pink-haired person before. It is our reminder to you, a reminder to me, a reminder to all of us to take care of ourselves. We have some interaction today. We've got 3 points of interaction that you can participate in or not participate in. We are recording today so that you can leave if you need to leave. It's going to be heavier content today than a lot of the webinars that we produce. So please take care of yourself with whatever that means for you. Let me give you a little bit about who I am so that you know who you're spending time with today. Again, my name is Michael Munson, and I'm Forge's Executive Director. For a visual description, today I have on a pink checked shirt with a white undershirt. On a side to the white undershirt, my new dog decided that white undershirts are to be scared at and growled at. So maybe not wearing the white undershirt in the future. Anyway, more visual description. I've got glasses, a beard, and relatively short hair. I'm white appearing and pretty traditionally masculine looking, even though not identifying. I am Forge's main trainer and involved with almost all of our projects. So I'm excited to be here with you today and excited about all the work that I get to do with Forge and all the work that we get to do with you all who are listening today. Just a quick nugget about who Forge is. We're a 28-year-old trans anti-violence organization. We are national in our scope. We do some work here in Wisconsin, where a couple of our staff are located, but we have folks that are on both coasts. We have ASL interpreters who are our great consultants who are even farther than the coast, which is really fantastic and really early for them. So we're grateful that our extended team is willing to get up early with us. We provide a lot of training and technical assistance for victim service providers and other allied professionals. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this. I encourage you to check out our website if you'd like to know more about the services that we offer to other providers. We also do some work directly with trans communities and trans survivors. Again, all of that can be in a national scope. It can be online. It is online so that people can access anywhere in the world. We have a really small staff and a really large vision. So this is a very goofy photo of us. I think I used this last time we did this series. This was taken at Pride this past year. So we are a fun, loving group of people that work on really tough subjects. We try to be trauma-informed and empowerment-based in all of the work that we do. Sometimes that's difficult. Today it will be difficult to be trauma-informed and empowerment-based, but we care about these two concepts both with the providers that we work with, as well as the consumers and the trans communities that we work with as well. Caleb who's back on the back end today. We'll put in some links today, including our social media links. We like to follow other folks, and we encourage you to follow us and have some dialogue with us on social media. It's a great way for us to share resources and information and hear what you are all doing as well. So throughout today's webinar, we're going to be sharing little bits of trans joy and trans hope. These always make me smile. They're really fantastic quotes from folks that we collected in November of last year, so during the Trans Day of Remembrance month, to try to kind of counter and remind us all of the joy and hope that's in our community. So as we move through today, at the end of each section, Laurie Cook-Daniels, who is on Forge's staff, will be sharing each one of these quotes. So Laurie, do you want to read this first quote?
Yes, thank you, Michael. What gives me hope for the future is that we get to experience glimpses or moments of this future we're all building and working towards together, where all trans folks are safe, cared for, and valued.
Great, thank you, Laurie. And I've noticed that a couple of the quotes that we'll be using today, I've noticed some of the folks that are in attendance. So it's really nice to see some of the folks that participated in that campaign also joining us today. All right, so a couple of pieces of framing. We scheduled this topic about a year ago, and I know that we're all aware of a lot of stuff that's happened between a year ago and now. And I will admit that I was continuing to make edits to this up until last night. So a lot has changed over the last year, a lot has changed over the last month. And we know that anything that we present today is going to be different tomorrow or the next month or the next, over the next year. So please recognize that this webinar is capturing this small moment in time, and that things change, news changes, and things might change for the positive, we hope, or it may get worse. We don't know, and we're going to all be on this ride together and hopefully make a difference in making things better. I'm not going to share a lot of exact numbers like, oh, these are this many bills that have been introduced by Congress, because again, this is a snapshot, and that number is going to change tomorrow. Most of what I'll be sharing with you today has been stuff that has happened between November of 2022 and mid-January, so right now, so the last 2.5 months. So this is a really short period of time, which could make it either really depressing or really uplifting that there's so much that's going on that we're tracking and being mindful of, that we can make a difference about. We could spend days talking about the intersections of culture and politics and current events and legislation. And although we're focusing on anti-trans issues today, we know that many other communities and identities and experiences are also being targeted now as well. We acknowledge that many rollbacks and new actions that are impacting many different communities. We know that people who hold many different identities are also impacted by some of the legislation that we'll be talking about today, as well as additional legislative efforts. We recognize that a substantial impact on the continued racism and anti-Semitism and xenophobia and all of those other isms really permeate our society right now. And we also recognize that in this post-Dobbs world, there are a lot of issues that stem from the concepts of bodily autonomy and the concerns about what legislative actions may emerge in this post-Dobbs world. So we're all going to keep tracking those things, but we're aware of those intersections and hope to bring some of them forward in the time today. We know that the subject, talking about hate and state-sanctioned issues, is very, very difficult. And it's going to be really difficult for us to present this content without sharing some of the trauma that's embedded in the content. So we do try to be trauma informed. We have been very mindful in the images that we've used, the words that are on the screen, to try to minimize the level of trauma that's felt. But we, again, recognize that it's traumatic content, and we really encourage everybody to take care of yourself, know that it's recorded. You can come back later or not come back later and listen to the rest of it. So what is state-sanctioned hate? It's a word that some of us might be kind of familiar with. It might be a totally new word to some of us. It's a word that I wasn't able to find a lot of definitions for. So when Forge looks at this word, this phrase, we've kind of divided this into two general concepts. So um, state-sanctioned hate are behaviors, biases, or crimes that are perpetuated by legislation, political or cultural movements, by law enforcement, or by media. State-sanctioned hate is also systemic and institutionalized harm based on a foundation of hate intended to erase or degrade a group of people within a shared identity or experience. Don't need to remember all of that. We're going to be talking about it the whole time today. So it's difficult to figure out who the full scope of state-sanctioned hate, since it unfortunately is still growing and evolving in new ways every day. But there are some key players about who is perpetuating the hate that's going on right now. Some of those people that are perpetuating the hate are politicians and legislators. So the people that are running for office, the people that have been elected for office, the people at all levels of elected office, so from local levels to federal levels. We're talking about celebrities who are perpetuating some of this violence as well, or people in high positions of visible power. So we won't talk too much about this today, but there are people that we know like Elon Musk and others who are really sending out a lot of anti-trans hate. We have schools and school boards and parents, and this can be the schools themselves or the school boards or individual parents of students or other people in the school settings that are perpetuating. We have health clinics, so these can be mainstream health clinics or hospitals who are causing harm or causing restrictions against trans folks. Law enforcement can also be perpetrators or perpetuating this cycle. And law enforcement has, and in many cases, has enhanced anti-trans policies and legislation, or at the very least, have turned a blind eye to the impact of what's occurring in their communities. And we have religious folks or religious institutions, which may take the form of conversion therapy or some other things that are negatively affecting trans communities. So you might wonder why I've put who's being targeted on the screen, because it might be obvious, but I want to spell this out a little bit, because when we're talking about anti-trans hate violence, it might be more than just the trans folks that are affected. So when we've looked at what's happening right now, we definitely know that trans and non-binary people are being affected. The families of trans and non-binary people are also being affected. The doctors and therapists and other service providers are being affected by these state-sanctioned, hate-motivated things. We also know that politicians and other legislators are being affected as well. Schools are being affected, religious institutions, businesses, and organizations. So you saw there was some crossover on the who's perpetrating and who's affected. So it can go both ways, and it can be different parts of those kind of communities and sets of people that may be doing harm or receiving harm. There are a lot of tactics that are being used right now. And this is a relatively new concept of state-sanctioned hate, right? So some of these concepts are in their infancy, even though the behaviors have been around for a longer period of time. Well, some of the obvious modes are the legislative actions, kind of what we're talking about, state-sanctioned hate. It implies legislation. There are many other ways that things are rolling out. So legislation and criminalization. So that can be the reversal of prior protections, or it could be the creation of new restrictions. We can also have things like a mode of policies. So schools may not have legislation, but they have policies or things that are put in place that are rules. So legislation, policies, social media, which we're going to talk a fair amount about today. News, so other types of media in addition to social media, so mainstream news and other forms of news. We have things like the dark web, so back channel things like 4chan or 8kong, Discord channels, Stormfront, Telegram channels, lots of those things that many of us have never even heard of that are communication channels. We also know that some of the modes are in person, so in-person rallies, in-person protests, in-person coming to people's places of business or homes. And that leads us to the last piece, which is doxing. So doxing is a word or a concept that most of us know about, but maybe we don't know the word. And so the word is basically saying that it's a form of harassment and violence that is publicly exposing somebody's name or their address or their personally identifying information. All right, so this is our first time to explore one of the polls. So if you have your cell phone handy, get it out, please. And hopefully this will work. So let me launch our poll. And the question for those of you who may not have a phone and want to use the chat feature instead, the question is, in your community, have you seen anti-trans initiatives around bathrooms, sports, healthcare, drag events, criminalization of parents of trans kids, targeting of providers, books or school curriculum, transition bans or detransition bills, or political campaigns? So hopefully you'll be able to see that poll and enter data into it. And if not, please do feel free to enter it in the chat. And I'm just going to give folks about 30 seconds to find that and enter. So it does look like some of you are able to get into the poll, but if you're only able to select one option, we're going to have a little bit different results. So, and I know that a lot of states, like I'm seeing in the chat, Florida, almost all of those things are happening. Right. So hopefully you're seeing on the screen, on the PowerPoint screen now, some of the results of that. And it sounds like many of you are seeing a lot of these things in your communities, which is not a surprise to hear. Thank you for participating in the poll or in the chat. Let's move on and talk about some of the examples. So some of those examples that we just listed out there that you're only able to respond to with one answer. And let's look at some of what's happening around the country. So again, just a reminder, this is being recorded. If you need to step out, please, take care of yourself when listening or not listening to this content. So we're going to look at these 12 concepts today. So maybe 10, maybe 11, maybe 12, depending on how you count them. So we look at social media, healthcare access, threats against providers, child abuse, transition bans or detransition bills. And I'm sorry, I just spoke way too fast for ASL. Schools and books, bathrooms, sports, workplace, money that politicians are using, are politicians that are behaving badly, and drag. So those are the areas that we're going to look at and give a couple of examples of for each of them. So we're going to start with social media. So although social media might be looked at more as a mode rather than an area of state-sanctioned hate, we want to start here because of how it runs through all of the other areas. So social media is one of the powerful routes in which hate violence is quickly and powerfully spread. Let's start with an example of what a typical cycle looks like when fed through the social media mill. Social media accounts like Libs of TikTok, which is not really TikTok, it's a Twitter account, and right-wing political commentators like Matt Walsh, who's on the screen, have instigated a cycle of harassment and stigma with the ultimate goal of inciting violence and shutting down things like life-saving, medically necessary, gender-affirming care. Give a couple of examples. 24 different hospital and providers across 21 states have been directly attacked online following harassing, inflammatory, and misleading posts that they've made. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of those posts later. There have been bomb threats against children's hospitals, against individual medical providers, and other trans-affirming health clinics. Several providers have had to remove things like their gender-related content from their websites, and some have had to even stop their services altogether as a result of some of these actors on social media who have really been very damaging. So let me share with you a little bit of a cycle, a typical cycle on social media and what that might look like in terms of this violence. So if we start out with hate speech, so the box that's in the top right of the pie, we know that hate speech accounts post an inflammatory message full of disinformation about gender affirming care and call out a specific hospital or doctor by name. That's what happens first. Second thing that tends to happen is that the doctor or hospital almost immediately begins receiving a ton of harassing and threatening messages. Then if we drill down even farther, the doctors or the providers themselves, so not their institutions, but the providers themselves, also start to receive offline harassment or online harassment and threats at their homes or their workplaces. What happens next in this rapid succession is that politicians begin exploiting the situation. So they might introduce legislation, they may start reposting some of this information. So the politicians get jumped in really quickly in this process. Next piece of this in this example is that hospitals shut down affirming gender clinics or gender-related services and remove the online resources and remove their websites in order to protect the safety of their patients and their staff. So that is kind of the cycle of what tends to happen. And this cycle can move very, very quickly. So give you a couple of examples. The very same day that Matt Walsh first tweeted about the Vanderbilt Gender Clinic, the Tennessee governor called for an investigation of the Vanderbilt Clinic. Within 48 hours, Matt Walsh announcing on Twitter that several state legislators in Tennessee were writing a bill with the goal of not only shutting down the Vanderbilt Clinic, but also making gender-affirming care illegal statewide. So at the same time as that was going on, Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn had called the FDA to investigate provisions of puberty blockers in an attempt to end the provisions of puberty blockers nationwide. So all of this is happening. That's in one state. And at the same time, in Pennsylvania, the governor there, Doug Mastriano, accused Children's Hospital of Philadelphia of kidnapping homeless trans youth and performing gender experiments on them. So that's kind of like a cycle of what's happening. It moves very, very quickly once things get posted on social media. Let me share a couple of other social media examples. So in the month after the Florida Don't Say Gay law passed, big quotes around the Don't Say Gay, the number of tweets using slurs such as groomer and pedophile in relation to trans and LGBTQ folks surged by 406%. So 10 people drove 66% of the impressions for the 500 most viewed hateful grooming tweets. Excuse me. Excuse me. When we look what Governor DeSantis has done, other extremists have captured and carried on with some of the messages, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, and other pro-activists like the Libs of TikTok founder Kaya Ratchek. So posts from these 10 people alone, so these 10 people that are really the influencers that are sending out these messages, generally reach more than 48 million views. And the top 500 most influential posts have been seen 72 million times, probably more than that by now. So again, just exponential what a small number of people can do to influence the narrative. So some of the safety measures that had been in place and still are in place haven't been followed. And some of this has happened post-Twitter CEO change, and some of it has just gradually happened over time. So for example, Twitter failed to act on 99% of 100 hateful tweets that were reported to them anonymously by the Center for Countering Digital Hate. So they didn't respond to 99% of the ones that were reported to them. In the week following Twitter's statement that tweets calling transgender or non-binary people groomers violated its policies on hate speech, there were still over 8,000 tweets per day on average mentioning the slur alongside LGBTQ communities. What gives me hope about the future is that we are part of a large world and a large web of people working on positive, real, meaningful change. These people are of many ages and backgrounds, and good changes are being created. And that's a quote by Joseph Kindred. All right, let's move to this next area of healthcare access. Most of us have likely seen some of the anti-trans healthcare bills that are being proposed, and we'll share just a couple of them here. So this kind of steps outside of the traditional bans that we're seeing. So the Protect Children's Innocent Act would ban gender-affirming care for trans minors at the federal level, making it harder for trans adults to access care, gender-affirming care, as well as schools. School-age kids. It would even ban medical schools from teaching about gender-affirming care. The sponsor of this bill is Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. To add a little bit more detail, this federal bill would make it a Class C felony to provide gender-affirming care for transgender minors, ban federal funds from being used for all such care, regardless of the patient's age, ban medical students, like I mentioned, from teaching about trans-related care, stop healthcare plans under the Affordable Care Act from funding gender-affirming care, and ban anyone who provided gender-affirming care from immigrating to the US. There could be a maximum sentence, jail sentence of 10 years in prison or jail. So Arkansas in 2021 had the Save Adolescents from Experimentation Act. It sounds scary in and of itself. And it became law after the General Assembly overrode Governor Hutchinson's veto. The SAFE Act prohibits health insurers from covering the costs of gender-affirming healthcare. It is a blanket ban on the provision of gender-affirming healthcare. So just blanket, no, you can't do any of it. It also sets up a process by which healthcare professionals who offer gender-affirming care will lose their licenses to practice medicine. So some pretty serious stuff. Many other states are proposing or enacting similar laws. So Florida has banned Medicaid coverage for trans adults and is banning gender-affirming care for trans teens. Missouri has a current bill in 2023 that would make gender-affirming care for trans youth, including puberty blockers and hormone therapy, illegal, and would penalize doctors. It would also force detransition on youth. Oklahoma has a 2023 bill that would ban gender-affirming care for anyone under the age of 26. So not just youth, but people up to the age of 26. Last September, the University of Oklahoma, the only hospital in the state that offered gender-affirming care to trans and non-binary youth, was pressured into stopping some gender-affirming care services after the governor and state threatened to withhold funding from that institution. There are a few more. There's like New Hampshire, which has a bill that bans hormone replacement therapy and other gender-affirming care all the way up to age 21. New Hampshire and South Carolina are also either have had bills or are being introducing new bills to raise the age of transition to 21. Some of these things are kind of hard to imagine how they're going to enact them, but these are some of what's happening. And there's a couple more right now that are still in the works. One is a bill in Kentucky that would ban, again, gender-affirming care for anyone under age 18, and Kansas, which would also ban care for anyone under the age of 21. In Kansas, they are also saying that anyone knowingly performing or causing to be performed, so parents could potentially fall under that, can be charged with a felony severity level 4, which has a sentencing range of 3 to 14 years. So really, really serious stuff that's happening all across our country. Lori, are you able to see the screen and read this quote?
I have control over my screen again. I think
right.
gender diverse people are artists at birth. How we diligently create beauty despite difficulty, how we reinvent ourselves and shape our lives with so much creativity.
Great, thank you. Let's look next at this kind of adjacent topic of threats against providers. So you've kind of heard some of that in the healthcare bans and things in the last section. So we know that some of the providers are being threatened to lose their license. I'm not sure that we know of anybody who has lost their license, but there's there's many pieces of legislation out there that are attempting to stop providers from practicing. So as we move into the sexual section, it's useful to keep in mind the parallels with other hate-based movements. So for example, the post-Dobbs actions that have really put healthcare workers' lives in jeopardy for providing reproductive care for anybody that has a uterus. So a Michigan House Bill number 6454, filed in October of last year, would amend Michigan's definition of first-degree child abuse to include anyone who knowingly or intentionally consents to, obtains, or assists in providing gender-affirming care, such as puberty blockers, hormone therapy, or surgeries to a trans child. This bill may not only impact the healthcare providers, but would also extend to things like office staff, parents, therapists, or anyone who's interacting with that trans child. The Fenway Institute is one of the largest LGBTQ clinics in the country, located in Boston, Massachusetts, and they provide really leading edge trans healthcare and run a national LGBTQIA plus health education center that trains literally thousands of providers every year. In August of last year, a person from Texas threatened to kill one of the Fenway Institute's doctors. And a day before these threats, the Boston Children's Hospital received a bomb threat. The Boston Children's Hospitals received several bomb threats over the last year because they provide gender-affirming care to trans youth. These threats against Boston Hospital were supposedly in response to information that the Boston Children's Hospital provided hysterectomies and gender-affirming surgery to patients under age 18. Lori, can you read this quote, please?
There is a spiritual power in the collective when Black trans femmes come together to celebrate and spotlight our joy. We place joy at the center of our spaces because spaces created for us are often only interested in our trauma and pain. When we center our joy, we create space for possibility and hope. While trauma and pain keeps us tethered to the past, joy allows us to dream of and push ourselves toward a brighter future.
Thank you. Let's move on and look at some of the child abuse claims. So again, we're seeing that. You've seen some of that in what we've shared already. So many on this webinar have already heard about some of these new stories in states like Texas attempting to enact laws that would criminalize the behavior of very loving parents who are providing access and affirming care for their trans children. I wanted to note too that a couple of these images used in this webinar, the ones that are kind of pink and blue overlaid, are from Erin in the Morning, which I'll share a little bit more of as a resource at the end. But she has some really fantastic graphics that she uses, and this is one of them. So in Missouri, State Bill 281 in Missouri would require that all parents who obtain gender affirmation care for their trans youth be reported to the state agencies for child abuse. So this is true with no exceptions for providing care out of state. Many won't be surprised to learn that our pal down in Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis, has stated that parents who bring children to drag shows or drag events should be investigated for child abuse. Just kind of a reminder too that most drag shows are oftentimes at night at bars or places for people over 21. So most kids are not going to be attending those kinds of events, but we'll talk about some of the things that kids might be attending later on today. Lori, another quote, please.
When I look at my niece and nephew, they are full of joy and love. Seeing them thrive gives me so much hope.
Thank you. All right, let's look at it. We're just going to do one slide on transition bans and detransitioning, because that's kind of been woven through some of the healthcare bans. So many of the things that we're talking about today may imply or have the end result in creating an environment that forces young people and adults to not voluntarily, but to detransition kind of in a forceful way. Some of these could also be framed as transition bans or laws that would make it very difficult for people to access gender-related affirming care. So there are several states that are proposing different things that would force detransition. So Ohio is proposing a law to detransition all trans teenagers. Again, how they are going to do that, I'm not sure, but they're proposing that in law. Alabama and Arkansas have already done so. So they've enacted laws that basically are requiring young people to transition back to their gender assigned at birth, sex assigned at birth. Virginia, Tennessee, and Montana also have gender affirming care and detransition bills in the works right now. Oklahoma could also force trans people under 26 to detransition medically. So those are just a few of the states that are actively pushing for detransition of younger folks. Lori, another quote, please.
On a much bigger scale, Trans Joy is looking at transness as a heritage. There's such a rich Burmese trans feminine culture, which is really amazing. In a country where homosexuality is illegal and trans people are not legally recognized, trans people still exist and thrive and have for centuries. It's been really beautiful to discover that history and connect to it.
Thank you. Let's look at books and schools next. So PEN America, for folks that you don't know about PEN America, it's an organization that stands at the intersection of literature and human rights to protect free expression. They were noting that there are at least 50 groups across the country with 300 chapters that were formed, 73% of those were formed after 2020. So an emergence of people caring about books and that protecting that right to freedom of expression and the human rights associated with books. Florida Citizens, so we're going to talk about Florida again. Florida Citizens Alliance co-founders Flan and Pastor Rick Stevens, who many of you might be familiar with, both served on Governor DeSantis's transition committee, and 5 years ago drafted a bill that that gave all county residents, not just parents, the power to challenge a book in a school district. Local tax dollars fund the school systems, so basically everyone has a right to influence how the money is being spent. Missouri, like many other states, have current Senate and House bills that prohibit the discussion of LGBTQ issues and identities in the classroom. So folks are not supposed to bring up things like pronouns or talk about same-sex relationships or talk about gender identity at all in the classroom in Missouri. Virginia is currently trying to force a school board policy that would ban trans students from using bathrooms that align with their gender and forcing teachers to misgender or dead name them. This is a common thing that's kind of gone in cycles, but Virginia is one of those current places right now that's popular with that. And another quote, please.
My son Miles gives me hope about the future. He will always know that he was made with trans joy and resilience. I am proud to be his dad, Adam.
So many of these quotes are just so beautiful, but it's like, I mean, the concept of like, this child was made with trans joy. Like, I mean, that's just a beautiful concept, as there are with all of these quotes that have just these little nuggets of wonderfulness. And so I encourage folks to go back and take in some of these quotes. So we're going to look at bathrooms next. So many of us have heard lots of things about bathrooms and locker room access over the past probably 10 years or so. And there's been some ebbs and flows in how many folks are paying attention to what's going on with bathrooms. And the fight is continuing and in some respects getting a little bit stronger the last year or so. So Kentucky is full of a lot of anti-trans legislation. Some has failed, some has passed, and some have, included things like medically detransitioning all trans teens, like we mentioned a little bit ago. Another one of the bills that's currently in the work is about banning trans people from playing on sports teams that align with their gender identity. This newer bill, introduced in 2023 by Bill Wesley, calls transgender students in bathrooms an emergency. He indicates that it possesses significant disruption of school activity and unsafe conditions when trans students use a facility that aligns with their gender identity. People like this politician don't seem to realize that it creates an emergency in a different way for the trans youth that need to use the bathroom, and it creates an unsafe environment for those trans youth as well. But that's my annotation on that, not what this governor thinks. So this bill, HB 30, requires trans kids to use the bathroom associated with their sex assigned at birth, or to out themselves in order to request a different accommodation. It also gives non-trans people 2 years to sue if they discover that they used a locker room or bathroom with a trans person. That's pretty stunning. A speaker at a school board school board meeting in Arkansas told a room full of students and their LGBT classmates that many of them deserve to die, and said a lot of really, really horrible things. And I'm going to probably skip over some of what was said there. But the people in the audience had to listen to the hate speech that happened, and then the policy was voted on and went through. So everyone, had to listen to it and endure what was said. Were called things like abominations and groomers and pedophiles. So people are having to hear this in their school board meetings, as well as online, as well as in the public discourse. Lori, another quote, please.
What gives me hope for the future is watching young trans people and allies dancing in the street with unbridled pride, representing a future where people do more than tolerate us, but rather accept us as part of the fabric of the whole cloth of humanity. Marcus Arena.
So Marcus is one of my litter mates. We are the same generation, and he is a fantastic human. All right, let's look at sports for a second. Trans people in sports also have received a lot of attention over the past few years, and things are ramping up even farther. So many states and municipalities have adopted anti-trans sports policies. Some, like in Ohio, had proposed a genital check, literally making people drop their pants, lift their skirt, and have their genitals looked at before being allowed to play on segregated sports teams. More currently, going on right now in Louisiana, it's one of 3 states that are requiring trans students to have had genital surgery in order to participate in school sports. What's ironic about this is that all of the folks that are against gender affirming care or not allowing trans youth to have surgery or hormones, they wouldn't be allowed to have surgery, but this is what is being required of them in order to play sports in school. So a little bit of a kind of a mind bend in trying to figure that out. And Lori, when you're ready for the next quote.
Watching all the young trans kids grow into themselves with the support and love from community, family, and friends, despite all the anti-trans legislation being passed. We are a resilient and strong community. That's trans joy for me. Jevin Martin.
Thank you. All right, let's look at workplace. We've got one slide on workplace, and it's really interesting. So, most of what we've talked about has really impacted youth, but there's also a growing number of legislative efforts and cultural swings that are affecting adults, both in general and in the workplace. So again, while there have been, many of these efforts on schools forcing teachers and stuff to use the names and pronouns other than what a student uses, a recently introduced bill in North Dakota, it's Senate Bill 2199, is the first of its kind to implement a DNA-based pronoun mandate. And you might be spinning your head like I did of like, what is a DNA-based pronoun? Like DNA is what's in our bodies. Like, what is a DNA-based pronoun? So you're correct if you're like, they don't exist. DNA pronouns do not exist. They don't. But this bill is proposing that they do exist. So this bill would mandate that all employers in the state who receive state funds, as well as all schools, institutions, state agencies, and offices, requires all of those folks to misgender trans people at large, not just students, based on their DNA. So this bill mandates that words used to reference an individual's sex, gender identity, or gender expression mean the individual's determined sex at birth, male or female. So it gives two options. It also mandates that this be determined through the individual's DNA, so that person's DNA. Those who violate calling people by the pronouns that align with their DNA will be fined by the state $1,500. So this bill obviously, of course, presumes a lot of different things, like there are XX and XY chromosomes, and that's what everybody has, which is not true, and that somehow pronouns are linked to those chromosomal structures. So lots of misinformation there, but these are real life policies that have real life effects. All right, let's look at money next. Money that's been spent on anti-trans political agendas. So we've got some things that are happening, like in South Dakota, Governor Kristi Noem canceled a contract with the trans organization Transformation Project. It was a group that was going to have a Midwest Gender Identity Summit this January, so this month, with Stanford Health. A right-wing website, the Daily Signal, called gender-affirming care experimental medicine and said that the Transformation Project celebrates controversial medical interventions for minors and hosts events in which people ritually burn their old name. So the governor has said that the group hadn't met their contractual agreements, but this group disagrees. I'd like folks who are able to see the screen to look for a moment at this image, which I think is just a really, really stunning image. And I've paired this image with the fact that in the 2022 election cycle, Republicans spent $50 million on anti-trans ads and flyers in at least 25 states.
Trans joy simply must be the scariest thing for non-transgender people, as they do all they can to push it down. That's one of the most powerful things about being a transgender person, is rising above incredible adversity just to be yourself. Given all the hatred, the violence, the legal battles, and we still are here. We still survive. And most importantly, we still thrive. We're still standing and we're still able to be joyful in the face of, well, everything. That's the sort of power that makes evil shudder in terror. Gwendolyn Ann Smith.
And for some of you who know your history, Gwen Smith was the originator of Trans Day of Remembrance, also one of my age peers and a very old friend who has lots of wonderful things to say. So we just talked about politicians spending 50 million bucks on anti-trans ads. There are other things that politicians are doing as well. So the image on the slide dates back to 2021. So this is one of the few things that is going back a little bit more than a year. So this was during the debates around the Equality Act, and Illinois Representative Marie Newman has a trans daughter. And she, like several other of her colleagues in the Senate and the Congress, put up pride flags, trans flags, LGBT flags. So she put up a trans flag outside of her office. And outside, across the hall from her, was the office of Marjorie Taylor Greene. And Marjorie Taylor Greene put up this really large sign that says there are two genders, male and female. Trust the science. So this is just another example of politicians behaving badly. So Marjorie Taylor Greene has gotten a lot of press today, and she certainly has opposed many of the issues that we're talking about that have come up. She has lots of irrational points as well. So this is one of those points of irrationality. So, Marjorie Taylor Greene, along with 28 other Republicans, including Lauren Boebert, Louis Gohmert, Rick Crawford, voted against a popular bipartisan bill to address the mistreatment of child sexual abuse victims that sometimes face that child sexual abuse victims sometimes face the mistreatment of. And it was in a bill it was in an act that was called the Respect for Child Survivors Act. So these representatives were very vocal about grooming and the abuse of trans children. How it got into this is a long and complicated story, but all of these folks have sponsored anti-trans bills in the past. Excuse me. So in not too long ago, in November, a day after the shooting at Club Q in Colorado Springs, Georgia's GOP Senate candidate Herschel Walker referred to trans people as the enemy before releasing an anti-trans ad that targeted Leah Thompson, a trans athlete who's been really receiving a lot of hate for the last several years. In another ad by Florida's Senator Marco Rubio, he said that they indoctrinate children and try to turn boys into girls. They meaning trans folks or trans people. Rubio also featured the person that's on the screen right now, drag queen, Little Miss Hot Mess. And she has like snapped back at him and given him some attitude. She knows how to dish it out as well. So, but those are two public officials that have really behaved badly. So this is an interesting piece of a lot of confusion that was raised with this. So this is about Indiana's Republicans that have worked to really confuse a lot of folks with their bill HB 1118. So the bill seeks to ban conversion therapy, an effort that many trans and LGBT people support, banning conversion therapy. However, Indiana is defining conversion therapy as physical conversion therapy. In other words, a healthcare professional may not purposefully attempt to change, reinforce, or affirm a minor's perception of their own gender identity when it's inconsistent with the minor's biological sex by engaging in any of the following activities. So the bill then goes on and lists things like puberty blockers or hormones, along with items like subjecting a minor's genitals to electric current, wrapping their hands in heat coils, injecting drugs to make them vomit. So the bill would also trigger a child abuse investigation if the parent approved gender affirming care for that child. And it says that the violations of the legislation would be a level 5 felony and subject to 1 to 6 years in jail. So really flipping it on its head with what conversion therapy is and what they're trying to make it out to be. Lori?
It gives me hope seeing so many trans folks thriving and changing the narrative around us being statistics. We are a part of the demographics that make America better simply because we exist. D.D. Waters.
Thank you. And just a plug for D.D. Waters. We had invited her to a Milwaukee local Trans Day of Remembrance, and her her speech that evening is posted on our YouTube channel. It is amazing, and it's very relevant and related to our content here today. So I encourage folks to check that out as well. All right, so this is kind of our last category, and it's about drag. So many of us have been seeing a lot of content about drag, about the Proud Boys, just a lot of political and media attention in the last year. Again, mostly around Proud Boys and drag queen story hours. So if folks can get out your phone again, we're going to do one more. So we're going to do the next poll. And so let me just launch the poll. And this poll is, have you attended a drag queen story hour or drag event? So yes, no, or I want to. And you can obviously just add things in the chat too. So have you attended a drag queen story hour or drag event? Oh, and look at lots and lots and lots of you have attended. Yes. All right. Yes, yes, yes. Cool. Perfect. They're fun, right? I mean, they can be a lot of fun. There's a lot of politics around them within our own communities, but they can be really fun. Thank you for voting. All right, so let's look at kind of the bad side of what's going on around drag. So Tucker Carlson, who many of us know about, but probably very few of us watch, has urged his followership. He has a huge followership. So he urged his 3 million viewers to arm themselves against drag performers. This messaging has been really dangerously effective. As noted before, when we talked about things and how media kind of spreads things, the Human Rights Campaign reported that 406% increases in tweets using words like groomer and pedophile happened in the first 6 months of 2022. There have also been accompanying escalation of attacks on drag performers during that same period. Raquel Willis, who's a really profound thinker and writer, wrote on her Instagram the day after Colorado Springs. She wrote, "Hateful politicians craft dangerous narratives about us and encourage the general public to continue to do the same. Ignorance is disgusting as fuck, and we need to be vigilant about confronting it." So the Texas Family Project, it sounds so nice and wholesome. Texas Family Project has a report button, so a little button that you can click on their website that will allow you to report where drag events are. So you can report drag events anywhere in the country. We don't know what happens when people report a drag event, but it's pretty clear that they are organizing and figuring out where to send protesters to disrupt those drag events. So again, this is just a venue that people can say, hey, there's a drag event going on in my community, and that information will likely get doxed out, or people will show up at those events and disrupt. So most people are familiar with drag shows, a lot of events that are, for age 21 and over in bars. But in the last many years, probably the last 10 years or so, there have been these events that have really gained a lot of popularity called drag queen story hours. And they're really fun. Drag performers come and read child appropriate books, educational books. They sing, they make crafts, they take place in schools or libraries or bookstores or churches or synagogues. They're all across the country, and they're fun. They're playful. They sometimes have an educational component, and sometimes they're just plain fun. And people are gathering together in this really joyful setting. So in the past year, drag queen story hours have really been one of the main targets of the Proud Boys. So a lot of us have heard about the Proud Boys with what happened on January 6th in the Capitol. But the Proud Boys are really focused on trans folks and trans people in general. In Nevada, this past year, a man identified as a member of the Proud Boys, this white nationalist group, interrupted a drag queen story hour reading with a gun, and he forced these children in attendance to flee for their safety. So these little kids who were there in a very innocent, playful, fun way had the exposure of a really, scary event with a gun. In Oklahoma, a donut shop where there was a drag event regularly held was firebombed twice just for hosting drag events. In California, there's a group of about 8 Proud Boys who have repeatedly stormed into places, but had stormed into a library where a drag performer was reading to kids. And these people were making like white power hand throwing, homophobic and transphobic slurs around at the drag queen and the kids, forcing all of them to leave. So the drag queen and all of the kids to leave. So there's just a lot of disruption that's been happening, and a lot of people that are afraid to go to events because of the fear of what might happen. In 2022, we know of at least 124 significant threats and protests against these drag performances, specifically the drag queen story hours. Right. I'd like to show a part of a video, and this was in Columbus, Ohio, and the event was going to be called Holly Drag Storytime, and it was canceled due to the Proud Boys threats. So let me play this video for us, and we'll come back at the other side.
I wanted to take a minute to make a statement. This statement is mostly for grown-ups, FYI. Unfortunately, I don't have the song and dance number for you this morning. Right. Good morning. Technical difficulties. Okay, so I wanted to take a moment. I'm just going to read this statement because otherwise I'll be distracted. I wanted to take a moment to speak to everyone who purchased tickets to our event and to everyone who put so much time and effort into making this event happen. I stand here in this space where our school's parents and members of the church have so beautifully decorated last night. We borrowed trees, some of them from our kids' bedrooms. They let us borrow them. We built a photo booth. We have festive lighting, and we put together a stage ready for our performers. Their books were chosen, the holiday dance numbers were choreographed, and our students spent all week baking and making decorations, which you might be able to see some of. It turned out perfect, better than we had imagined. And I'm here on this empty stage because in the end, there was a disagreement about how this community should be best protected. There is a long documented and lived history of law enforcement doing harm to the LGBTQ community, among others, that continues to this day, ignoring, defaming, abusing, and killing LGBTQ+ persons, most especially those who are Black and trans. As even a cursory Google search will illustrate, it is no secret that extreme right-wing groups, including the Proud Boys, enjoy a cozy relationship with law enforcement. When the Proud Boys stated they would show up to intimidate and harass and bully our attendees and organizers, we had to make a decision about how we were going to keep everyone safe. I spent a week calling our police department and leaving voicemails about the reports we had seen. After a week, I was told we could hire a special duty officer who may or may not show up because they're understaffed. I was given an email address. In the meantime, a trusted community defense team with years of experience reached out with an offer to execute a thorough safety plan, including before and after event safety support, tech support, emergency plans, and a large on-site presence, all on a volunteer basis. They are members of the LGBTQ community who have a personal stake in ensuring this community's general safety. They gathered almost 200 people ready to create a perimeter shield and a barrier far from our building to keep things de-escalated outside. We took them up on their offer. Local media ran articles without calling me to ask for comment, yet insinuating that we were working with the police, who assured us journalists were aware and monitoring, assured journalists that they were aware and monitoring the situation. In reality, the police had offered nothing and were not in touch with us. A community liaison had returned a phone call And he told me he'd be out of the office next week, so if that's a problem, I don't know what to do about that. The City Council made a statement in which they offered reassurances that they were in touch with the police, who were monitoring the situation and will work to ensure the event can occur peacefully. We were never contacted by the City Council regarding their statement and still had no word from CPD. Yet I received hundreds of emails, calls, and messages from I'll get through it. From folks in the community asking, how can I help? What can I do? I'm ready to show up. I never heard this message from the city's leadership and those whose job it is to protect us. In the end, our performers felt unsafe without a police presence, while our safety team felt unsafe with a police presence. We decided it was not safe to proceed, and our Red Oak Planning Group made the call to cancel. While we felt strongly that the police's casual, distant acknowledgement of our event illustrated that they would not keep us safe, we also have to validate that our performers didn't feel safe unless there was law enforcement in the building. So it turns out our biggest problem wasn't the Proud Boys after all. I implore this community's leaders to consider how this could have gone differently, how they could have participated differently, how they could have supported us differently. How will they do better for the next drag story time when the Proud Boys threaten to show up again, which they will? How will our leadership work to create an environment where all members of our community feel safe? Those who might say, but you have to work with the police, are invalidating the lived experience of all who have had harm done to them by law enforcement and don't feel safe with them. They are not standing on principle. To dismiss those who feel unsafe with the police is to turn a blind eye to the systemic issues of safety within this community. We have to do better. The world is getting more and more unsafe for the LGBTQ community. The attacks are constant and getting worse. The fact that we are not able to successfully host this simple event shows the extent of the damage. We have to do better. Everyone all over the country who purchased tickets in solidarity, thank you so much. We felt your support. We sold almost 1,000 tickets to a children's storytime event after all. We raised over $5,000 for a local LGBTQ+ charity. We had more than 200 people attending this event in person, despite being scared. We're scared, but we're strong, and we will not go away or make ourselves smaller because someone bullied us. Please keep hosting these events in your communities. Keep marching, call your legislators. If you are a cis-het white ally, use your privilege and step up. Show up for this and other marginalized communities. Don't allow your advocacy to exist on social media platforms alone. Do the work. Thank you to the hundreds of people who have put so much of your time and resources into this event. You were willing to show up and do the work. Even though we weren't able to make this happen at the last minute, the outpouring of support in the face of extremists means something. Please continue to show up. Thank you for joining me this morning. Please hit up a drag show tonight and tip your queens. Thank you.
So I know that was a long video, but I'm hoping that people heard some of the nuance of what was there about who felt safe, protected by who, and how much work those kids spent creating something that didn't end up happening for them. We could talk for a long time about the implications of just this 7-minute clip of what happened in this small community. I'm going to move fairly quick because I know we've got about 15 minutes left. So there's a lot of connections that are there between words and actions, and I think that we've made that really, really clear about how it's not just words, and people are being harmed in very real world ways. Like we just saw in the video, the Proud Boys are showing up. They're showing up, or they're planning on showing up. They are showing up with weapons. They are showing up with law enforcement in tow, with law enforcement as their friends, and as many of the Proud Boys being law enforcement themselves. I mentioned in the beginning that I would circle back to libs of TikTok. So this is just an example of kind of how many tweets are being posted and how many have ended up with real world violence as a result of them. So in this example, 476 tweets named cities or states. Of those, 281 included specific locations or specific people. 22% of that 281 involved real world harassment or violence. So, we come from here's what's posted online to here's what happens in person on, in real life, with weapons, with disruption. Of the libs of TikTok in the last, I think it was the last 6 months, the top 5 words used are drag, schools, kids, gender, and family. So we know that there's a lot of impact on trans folks. So the whole point of devaluing people is the goal of a lot of folks that are doing this anti-trans violence and state-sanctioned hate. In an article published in Violence and Gender, one trans person said, it's one thing to have laws that discriminate against you, and another that has powerful people modeling actions and words that devalue you as a person and encourage others to do so. More and more, we're seeing parents of trans youth being ready to, at a moment's notice, leave and pick up out of their state to find another state where their child can get trans-affirming care. We're seeing that a lot of people are worried about losing their jobs, having their kids taken from them, going to jail, lots of things. So Erin in the Morning, again, is someone that is capturing a lot of this data. And I encourage folks to really dive into some of the things that she's sharing, because she gives a lot of examples of what people are feeling and the impact it has on their lives. People are ending up hiding who they are. Gavin Grimm, who some of you might know, is a really fantastic young activist. And he talks to a lot of young people. And he was saying that he wrote that, I talk to young people and trans adults all the time. What I'm seeing overall is that kids who were proud of their trans identity before now, all of a sudden they don't want to talk about it. The Trevor Project also noticed this change that's happened since 2021, even a little bit before that. They're finding that 85% of trans and non-binary youth reported that the debates about state laws restricting their rights as trans people has negatively impacted their mental health. Profound stuff. And we know that rates of suicide are astronomically high for trans folks. And when we add in the recent anti-trans legislation and cultural swing, these rates are likely going to be, even higher in the days and months ahead. And we know that some suicides of trans people are directly attributed to anti-trans initiatives. For example, the person on the screen right now is Henry Berg Brousseau. And Henry was an outspoken youth speaking to the Kentucky lawmakers in 2015, when he was only 16 years old, about a proposed bathroom bill. And he noted to them, if you don't know a transgender kid already, you do now. You know me, Henry, and I'd be honored to continue to work with you and help educate you on all trans things. Unfortunately, on December 16th of last year, at the age of 24, he ended his life by suicide. He had been on focusing his work at the Human Rights Campaign on political communications. And his mother, who is a Kentucky state senator and a radiologist, reported that, not long ago, he said to her, "Mom, they say it gets better, but it's not getting better. It only gets worse, and I'm scared." So all of these consequences are serious and really severe. ACLU's communication strategist, Jillian Brandstetter, said, this is manifesting policies that are seeking to suppress trans people, seeking to label us as inherently obscene and functionally erase us from public life. And we're seeing that trans communities are responding in different ways. So communities as a whole are responding. So some communities after the Club Q shooting and even some after the Pulse nightclub shooting are wanting involvement of law enforcement to help them learn about active shooter and drills and trainings. That's not welcomed by everybody, but some bars and clubs are really welcoming having more knowledge about how to address something when it may go down in a very serious and dangerous way. Like I mentioned before, there's increased security at drag events. Lots of drag events are having literally more security of, like in the video, we heard people were willing to kind of make a barrier. In this particular image that's on the screen, this was a show that was, or a drag queen story hour that was done in Milwaukee, I believe. And they had Planned Parenthood escorts willing to escort people in and out of the building. This, I believe, was at a church. So we're seeing increased security, increased bouncers, at bar events, and increased safety at non-bar events as well. We're seeing a pretty dramatic increase in gun ownership within trans communities. And this has increased across our general population as well. But a lot of trans folks are thinking that if nobody else is going to protect our community, that folks have to protect themselves. In a 2022 article by The Independent, Chloe Corrupt said, let me read the quote for you. Oops, sorry. Ooh. She said, I think the reality for trans people has gotten to the point where people want to kill us for who we are and where we're from. They've got guns, they know how to use them. So we have had the ability to protect ourselves. We're fools for not doing it. Let's look a little bit at resilience, and we'll wrap up for the day. So trans communities and our community as a whole are resilient. And sometimes it's hard to keep that in mind when there's so much that's going on that's painful and harmful. So here's a couple reminders. Drag performers are inherently resilient and give us a vision of liberation by their over-the-top nature. So on the screen, I don't watch TV. This is a RuPaul drag race winner. I think it's Evie Oddly. Just, look at that attitude, and it's kind of hard to not see that resilience and power in that pose. There continues to be an upswing in the number of trans and non-binary people who are running for political office. And some of them are running because of what's happening, the negative things that are happening politically against trans folks. So this is Zoe Zephyr in Montana, who's the first out trans person to be elected in that state. So woohoo. We're also seeing that, the Proud Boys might be showing up at places, but we've got a lot of folks who are showing up too, providing counter protests, providing, pathways for people to walk and shields for people to be able to enjoy events without the interference of those anti-trans folks. We're seeing other positives. So this may not be seen by positive by some, but many of you might remember last November when the DOJ and the Department of Homeland Security acknowledged that anti-LGBTQ threats were seen as terrorism, and there was an increase in that terrorism in the US. Now, that inherently is not a good thing, but what's good is that the Department of Justice is recognizing that trans and queer people are at risk. They're tracking what's trending, and they're paying attention. We have organizations that are paying attention as well. Excuse me. People like Futures Without Violence, who I'm going to mention just a second as well. They're paying attention to that intersection of what's going on between gender and race and different types of violence. We also have seen some really positive things come out of some, tremendous tragedy, like following the Club Q shootings. The Colorado Springs police and other law enforcement and media took time and took care to make sure that they got people's names right, they got their pronouns right, they got their gender right, and they wanted to do it right. They really, really took a lot of care in that. So kudos to them for making that effort, which oftentimes does not happen. We also have two slides of that are a little bit self-promoting, but there have been two funding streams that have really focused on hate-motivated crimes and hate violence. One is directly through the Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice assistance, and Forge is one of 7 that were funded to do hate-based work. So you'll hear more about that soon, next coming weeks and months. And same with Futures Without Violence, who received some pass-through money from Office on Violence Against Women and then distributed that to 12 grantees. So we're really pleased that we can do some of this work under those 2 funding streams. All right, one last interaction with our cell phones. Let me start the interaction. So the question is, what do you do to take care of yourself during these tough social, political, cultural times? What are you doing to take care of yourself? So you can feel free to enter it in the chat or enter it on your phone. So what do you do to take care of yourself during these times? So I'm going to read out some of the ones in the chat. So stay connected to my people, chosen family, finding and creating trans joy, resting, isolating. What else do you do to take care of yourself? Dissociating, participating in activism, advocating for folks, surrounding myself with community. Yeah. I rewatch Heartstopper and then rewatch it again. All right. Therapy. Excellent. Excellent. I'm going to let folks keep on rolling with us as we wrap up the next few slides. So please keep on thinking about how you take care of yourself and what you're doing with that. Thank you for sharing. So there's a lot of stuff that we can do. So we're going to be really simple about this, and I'm going to go very quickly through this, but I encourage you to rewatch and take in. So show up if you can, when you can, how you can, if it's safe for you. That could be speaking up, writing up, putting your body in places with people. Report hate speech online, contribute positive things to social media. Laurie, I will call you out in chat, who says, watch Daniel Craig's recent video. It's campy and fun. Do things like that. Yes. Listen to people. Listen to the people that you know, people that you don't know very well. Pay attention and listen. We posted this on social media right after Club Q, but love on your people. Love on your people who are your people and who aren't yet your people. Connect with your neighbors, your chosen family, your family, whoever it is that brings you some joy and some peace, and take time to care for yourself in all of this. Laurie, can you read this last quote?
I have seen enough change to know our future is getting brighter, and what used to be impossible became possible. Today, we have states that offer full protection to trans and non-binary communities. The setbacks we are witnessing is just a sign of our opponent's 11th hour effort to hold on to power. But I have faith that at the end, the victory belongs to us. Cecilia Chung.
Thank you, Laurie. So I just put in chat, we might go just a minute after 1:30. So a couple of resources and then we'll wrap up. Thank you all for being here today and sticking through some tough content. It's a couple of resources. Erin in the Morning, who I've mentioned several times, check her out. She has a fantastic resource, has both free and paid content. If you can afford to pay for her content, it supports this really amazing person doing amazing things. I encourage folks to check out the Equality Federation tracker. It's nonpartisan. It posts bills that are pro or con or hard to determine what they are, sexual orientation and gender identity. It's a really cool resource that goes by state. The Movement Advancement project has amazing resources, some on hate violence, some on lots and lots of other things. They've done a lot in bathrooms and locker rooms and school age things. Their materials are always really pretty. And I say that as a very big compliment because it makes it really easy to read their materials. It's always graphically really fantastic. And the Williams Institute is the last resource I wanted to share. And they're a little bit more academic. They also make really pretty documents, but they focus on many current issues. And they are a fantastic resource for lots and lots of things. So I encourage folks to check them out. I'm totally fine to stay a little bit longer and do questions with folks or comments, but I know many folks have to leave. So if you're able to respond to the evaluation, we'd really appreciate that. Caleb just put it in the chat. You can also feel free to reach out to me directly or any of us at staff at Forge. You can reach me on the contact information on the slide right now. We really appreciate all of you for being here. We love our ASL folks who have gotten up early on the West Coast and in Hawaii for us today. And we're really grateful for our back-end folks at Forge who are always so on top of things. So thank you all, and thank you all of you who attended today.